Good evening, I'm Claudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight. This is a historic moment. We are on the eve of America choosing the 47th President of the United States. After a dynamic few months of presidential campaigning, it will be either Vice President Kamala Harris or former President Donald Trump that will take a spot in the Oval Office. The final stretch of the presidential campaign will be the focus of today's broadcast. Our correspondents are on the ground to bring us the latest. Joining me later from Washington, D.C. is Benjamin Lee. From Florida, we have Don Arleth, and Aaron Damon is coming to us from Pennsylvania. More on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. EU leaders congratulate Maia Sandu on winning a second term as President of Moldova. Georgian opposition stages new protest over election result. Former Polish Minister of Justice failed to appear before the Pegasus Investigative Committee again. The presidential race between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump remains exceptionally close, with recent polls indicating a virtual tie in key battleground states, including Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. With just one day to go until Election Day, anticipation is high as voters prepare to cast their ballots in a closely watched race. Our correspondent Benjamin Lee is reporting live from in front of the White House. So, Ben, what are the latest developments?
Right, as you mentioned, Claudia, the race is very tight indeed. Tomorrow, the Americans will go to the polling station, cast their ballot, and to decide who will be occupying the White House just behind me. Now, when we look at the early voting numbers that are being counted right now, we do see a slight lead with Donald Trump in some of the states. However, in states like Pennsylvania, we also see Kamala Harris dominating the polling numbers when it comes to early voting. However, when it comes to actual poll numbers, things are still up in the air, and we'll have to see how things shape out. And some of the states, the early voting has already closed, while some is still ongoing, and some voting numbers will be tallied today. So we will be giving you guys more update as more information rolls out. And of course, this is going to be a closely watched election, like you mentioned. So we'll give it to all our other correspondents. Meanwhile, back to you in the studio.
That was Benjamin Lee coming to us from Washington, D.C. One day out from a crucial U.S. election, both presidential candidates are making a series of frantic stops across the battleground state of Pennsylvania. Our chief political correspondent, Aaron Damon, is there and joins us now. Good evening, or should I say good afternoon, Aaron. Why is Pennsylvania such an important battleground state?
Good afternoon, good evening, whatever you like, Claudia. We are here in Pennsylvania and it's almost showtime in the US, as Ben has mentioned. I mean, if anyone has any doubt how critical Pennsylvania could be in this election, well, take a look. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump both spending their last day of campaigning here in this swing state. Just behind me, Donald Trump is about to take to the stage in Reading, Pennsylvania, and this is an area, a city in Pennsylvania that has a large Hispanic and Latin population. You might recall Donald Trump's campaign copping heat for comments it made about Puerto Rico. Well, this is a chance perhaps to remedy some of those harms. And Donald Trump then heads to Michigan tonight. This has been a traditional final stop of his campaign, both in 2016 and 2020. He maintains that tradition today. Then he's done. Kamala Harris is here in Pennsylvania, in Reading, in just under 2 hours, and then her final dance takes place in Philadelphia. It could be a dance because there will be Oprah, there will be Lady Gaga performing. It's set to be quite the bash. And it's worth noting here that more than 77 million people have already cast their early ballots in this US election. Of course, in 24 hours, we will start to get an idea of how those votes have fallen.
Thank you so much. That was Aaron Damon coming to us from Pennsylvania. Keep us updated. With just hours to go before ballot boxes open for Election Day, polls and experts alike cannot predict the next president of the United States. Now let's go to Don Arleth, who is in West Palm Beach, Florida, where Donald Trump will have an election night event while awaiting the results of the election. Hello, Don. So what can you tell us about the mood in Florida right now, especially considering that this is where Donald Trump is going to await the election results?
Right. Not only, well, he's expected to win the state of Florida, but it's all down to the battlegrounds. Last night we were at a Trump rally in Macon, Georgia. It was a great experience to go. We were earlier at a Harris rally, then we were at a Trump rally. We really got to talk to the people, talk to the voters, see what was on their minds. Now, here's the interesting thing. The polls are super close, and if anybody thinks that they know who is going to be the next president of the United States, well, I can tell you they don't know. Everybody, it's a huge guessing game here. But the issues, this is what's important, and especially for us in Europe. So the number one issue for men is in this election is the economy. Now for women, especially amongst Harris supporters, it's reproductive rights. So we have two of these issues that are very dominating the playing field when it comes to why people are voting for who. And of course, immigration is also on that list. So this will affect us and the next president of the United States and the policy that they have towards Europe, towards NATO, towards the war in Ukraine, based on voters in places like these that are concerned about what's going on here in the country. And I think that was the biggest takeaway that I had after attending both of those rallies. And of course, this election is very much up in the air. So you're just going to have to stay tuned a little bit longer until we get to Election Day, and we'll be able to start announcing some of these results. Claudia.
This is definitely going to be a challenging but a very interesting, exciting time for all of us to watch. Don Arleth reporting from Florida. When Americans vote for president, their decision will reverberate around the world. Ukraine, whose defense against Russia is heavily dependent on U.S. military, financial, and diplomatic support, may feel the effects more than any other foreign country. Now, joining us live from Ukrainian capital of Kyiv is our correspondent, Oz Karaji. A very good evening, Oz. Please tell us what's the Ukraine's expectations regarding these elections?
Well, it's so night and day, the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans on this issue. So it's hard to gauge a reaction because obviously one party is more favorable to Ukraine than the other. So it should be no surprise that the government here in Kyiv would prefer a Democratic president in the White House. But of course, it has to prepare and has been preparing for some time. I think some would argue that the Kursk offensive was a way of ensuring that if a Trump president was to come in, that he wouldn't be able to freeze the conflict on the current lines of control, that they wouldn't be favorable to Russia. So it's hard to get reactions because obviously diplomacy is the name of the game at the moment. No matter who comes into the White House, Ukraine has a long list of demands that it wants from its partners. And it doesn't know whether it's going to be moving forward with continued aid or with pressure to make concessions to Russia as Donald Trump would favor. So a lot of nerves here in Kyiv as we look at the US election with a lot of uncertainty for what the future US policy towards Ukraine might be, depending on who is in the White House by January the 6th.
Thank you so much. That was Oz Karaji coming to us from Kyiv. Pro-European incumbent President Maia Sandu won the presidential runoff in Moldova. After all votes have been counted, it is now clear that the Eastern European country will remain on a pro-EU path despite alleged interference in the election process. Our correspondent, Marek Steele, is in Chisinau, the capital of Moldova. Marek, so tell us, what is being said about the final result?
So let me just mention the results themselves. 55.5% of Moldovans voted in favor of this pro-European president that you mentioned, Maia Sandu, while 44.5% of Moldovans voted for the candidate of the Party of Socialists, former Prosecutor General Alexander Stoyanoglu. So the results of this election were definitely a sigh of relief for the pro-EU camp, which has been ruling Moldova since 2020 when Sandu was elected first. Of course, the election results differed from region to region and differed a lot abroad. So it was thanks to the Moldovan diaspora living across the world that Maia Sandu actually secured a re-election. Outside of Moldova, 83% of those who took part in the vote voted for Maia Sandu, while Mr. Alexander Stoyanolo, the pro-Russian candidate, received only 17% of that vote. Inside Moldova, if Moldovans weren't able to cast their ballots outside of the country, it would have been Mr. Stoyanolo who would win this election with 51% support. In Chisinau, the capital, of course, Maia Sandu secured a majority of votes. In other regions, not so much. And in the breakaway province of Transnistria, Mr. Stoyanolo secured 80% of the vote. This election was marred by foreign interference. International observers have been reporting, and actually the OSCE, which has been monitoring elections across Europe, but in Moldova as well, said that Moldova's election was well managed, offered voters genuine choice despite legal deficiencies, unbalanced media coverage, and impact of foreign interference. And I spoke more about this foreign interference in the election in Moldova with Ms. Lucia Potuchkova, the special coordinator of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe for Moldova.
We recorded the foreign interference and, of course, the schemes of vote buying, intense vote buying caused by, influenced by Russian money, of course, and especially in the first round. And but I really believe, I have a deep trust in the Moldovan authorities and their police authorities to investigate these issues properly, and especially in judicial authorities, that they will take the proper activities, take the proper actions against such influence.
Not only Maia Sandu's camp could breathe a sigh of relief this morning where the official results were confirmed. This was also a good news for Moldova's European allies in the European Union and across Europe. So congratulations have been pouring in since early morning today when it became clear that Maia Sandu won re-election. So here we have an ex from Josep Borrell, a chief diplomat of the European Union. I wholeheartedly congratulate Maia Sandu for her victory in the presidential elections in Moldova. Moldovans have shown once again their determination to build a European future despite hybrid attempts to undermine democracy. And there's been lots of reports of these attempts. There's been also congratulations coming in from heads of state. Among them is Polish President Andrzej Duda, who wrote on X today, "Congratulations to Maia Sandu on your re-election. Your victory is a clear sign that Moldova's place is in the democratic and united Europe, and no external forces will ever change that." Moldova has probably, especially Poland's and other Central Eastern European countries' support when it comes to its EU membership bid. And let me just remind you that Moldova is an EU candidate. Ukraine has also been monitoring this election very closely. Volodymyr Zelensky wrote on X today, "Moldovans have made a clear choice. They chose a path toward economic growth and social stability. Only true security and a peaceful, united Europe can guarantee each person and every family the confidence to face tomorrow with hope and certainty." So the path towards the European Union that Moldova took back in 2022 after the Russian invasion of Ukraine started, together with Ukraine, these two countries applied for EU membership status, EU candidate status, and they received that status shortly. So the path to the EU was confirmed of Moldova during this election with a 55.5% success by Maia Sandu, the pro-European president. Back to you.
Marek Stier reporting from Chisinau, Moldova. Georgian citizens took to the streets encouraged by calls from the opposition as the country grapples with the fallout of the recent parliamentary election. With the election results still being disputed, the country's future is on the line. Karolina Stoltzman has more.
Georgian opposition's response to the pro-Russian Georgian Dream claiming victory in the recent election is clear.
What's happening here in Georgia is a coup.
As of right now, Georgia does not have an acting parliament, and the opposition has called for a rerun. According to the Georgian constitution, the country's president has to call the first session of the newly elected parliament, something Salome Zurabishvili hasn't done yet.
So probably The president of Georgia will issue a decree in which she will clearly state that the election was neither free nor fair. And then there will be this legal document, which in theory can be a reason to consider the parliamentary elections as non-complete.
Legally, Georgian Dream and its leader, Bidzina Ivanishvili, will be allowed to contest such a decree, creating space for more political disputes to come.
We know that Bidzina Ivanishvili will start arresting opponents, will start persecuting our families, and will cancel elections.
But a recent election in another small European Union candidate state gives Georgians some hope. Moldova and its pro-European re-elected president Maia Sandu had their own share of Russian interference to fight off during the recent presidential election, a similarity noted by the Georgian president.
Moldovan elections are the best evidence of stolen Georgia's elections. Despite similar Russian interference and massive rigging, Moldova was saved by 300,000 diaspora voters. Our 1 million-strong diaspora was barred. Only 34,000 were allowed to vote.
The EU suspended Georgia's accession process in July this year, following the country's adoption of a foreign agent bill, modeled after a similar Russian law. But before the EU can join the play again, for example using sanctions to put pressure on the Georgian Dream, the ball is in the opposition's court.
There are lots of things that opposition can do, but I'm not going to publicly disclose them because I have no intention to support Georgian Dream and make life easier for the guys.
An eventful time awaits Georgia as the opposition fights against the Georgian Dream and for a democratic Georgian future.
South Korea is considering providing military aid to Ukraine in light of North Korea's involvement in the conflict. The common security threat caused by cooperation between Pyongyang and Moscow was the focus of head of European Union's foreign policy Joseph Borrell's Monday visit to Seoul. Krzysztof Panek reports.
North Korean troops deployed to Russia's Kursk region have been struck for the first time by Ukrainian forces, Kyiv's officials announced on Monday. This deployment was the focus of Borrell's discussion with the South Korean foreign minister.
The dialogue comes at a critical juncture as the deepening military cooperation between North Korea and Russia poses a serious threat to the security of Europe, Indo-Pacific, and indeed the world at large.
The developments in this peninsula and in Ukraine, in Korea and in Ukraine, they are far away, but they are interlinked.
Pyongyang's involvement in the war in Ukraine has worried Seoul. It is unclear how exactly Russia will pay North Korea back for the large amounts of ammunition and now troops it provided for the war effort.
What if North Korea manages to get other forms of weapons and technology from Russia and, hypothetically, uses it against South Korea? These are all questions that South Korea will be asking.
The South Korean president has floated the idea of countering the North's involvement in the war by providing Kyiv with arms. Arms industries of Western countries are stretched thin by the needs of both Ukraine and domestic rearmament. In contrast, Seoul's robust defense sector still has spare capacity it could use to aid the embattled nation.
The European Commissioner hearings began at the European Parliament in Brussels. Slovakia's Maroš Šefčovič, the Trade Commissioner designate, outlined his vision for managing trade and economic security. Šefčovič, a trusted EU veteran, faces the task of balancing open trade with security concerns amid international tensions with global rivals like China. Our correspondent Sasha Farbach has more in his report.
It was all about trade, and more trade. As veteran of the EU Commission, Mr. Šefčovič from Slovakia was grilled by MEPs in a hearing that very much went smoothly. Now, it covered many things. On his beginning outreach and the first speech of those 15 minutes, he said what he wants to focus on for these next 5 years, if he's indeed approved, was 3 Ds. So that's driving EU competitiveness in line with the Draghi report, defending EU businesses against unfair practices, so a nod there to China, and deepening EU alliance alliances, and also mentioned very much about de-risking. Now, there was also questions on free trade agreements. He said this is something that he also wants to focus on once again. Now, he was grilled a bit by French MEPs about this, very much Mercosur in particular, which had been many years still in its implementation, well over 10 years. And this is something that certain French MEPs did not like, had expressed their worry. But this is also something in line with, if you look at free trade agreements with Australia, now those are 16 rounds now in terms of getting that deal right, still not fully complete. So he expressed his optimism there, but actual policy there is still missing in terms of completing these major deals. But then also looking at China, that was one of the main points that did come across. Now, he expressed himself very delicately, but also did very much hold to his gun, saying very much that if there are disruptive scenarios, that he would stand up for interests for the European Union, also very much calling time and time again for a level playing field in terms of trade policy. Of course, we know what's happened in the last weeks just with the EV tariffs that the European Commission has now slapped onto China, with very much also Prime Minister Fico of Slovakia in China at this moment, talking about closer cooperation, made for some awkward moments, but nevertheless, Mr. Šefčovič, as a veteran of Brussels, also sidestepped that and very much made it clear, though, that he has strong policy goals, that he has Europe at heart, and these are things that he wants to get through for the next 5 years, and also looking at any sort of deal, looking at the United States, saying very warm words about trying to still say that this is one of the most key trade alliances, a national partnership. So again, reaching out there for things like the Tech Council, the EU Trade and Tech Council with the United States. So many things on the agenda, but overall there was a positive feeling towards this hearing, that things have gone well and positive for this, and if he does make and gets the green light, he will be the next Trade Commissioner for the next 5 years. Sasha Farbach for TVP World in Brussels.
Not even the fourth time is the charm for former Justice Minister and Public Prosecutor General Zbigniew Ziobro, who once again failed to appear before the investigative committee on Pegasus spyware. Consequently, the committee initiated proceedings to revoke his immunity. Sonia Gatabiszczan reports.
Like the first two instances, when Ziobro missed his hearing due to health issues, he provided no justification for his absence on Monday, making it the second time he has done so without explanation. In response to the situation, the committee requested the court to impose a penalty on Ziobro for failure to appear. Additionally, it sought the court's assistance in summoning him before the committee and urged the Prosecutor General, Adam Bodnar, to initiate proceedings to revoke Ziobro's immunity. In a tweet citing the Constitutional Tribunal's decision, Ziobro referred to the Pegasus Committee as non-existent.
If the parliament establishes a committee on Pegasus without the flaws pointed out in the tribunal's ruling, I would gladly appear to testify, as my testimony will show how much I have done to ensure that Poles can feel safer. I am not surprised that Minister Ziobro did not appear before the committee, because this committee does not exist. There is a judgment of the Constitutional Tribunal which clearly states that the committee has no right to deliberate.
But Patryk Jaskulski, Civic Coalition MP and member of the Pegasus Investigative Committee, was of a different view regarding the committee's mere existence.
I am certainly tangible. The committee continues to meet. The resolution is still in force.
With respect to the next steps, it is up to the court to decide whether Ziobro can be brought before the committee, but that may be preceded by a parliamentary discussion on his immunity.
The matter will probably appear before the plenary chamber of the Polish parliament, and the MPs will decide on this matter. I personally think that all the MPs who formed the October 15th coalition will vote to remove the immunity, because no one can put themselves above the law.
The Pegasus Investigative Committee was established to investigate the legality of activities undertaken by the previous government and secret services using the Pegasus software, designed to infiltrate smartphones and other devices for surveillance purposes with the intent to fight terrorism and organized crime. One of the committee's tasks was to determine who was responsible for the purchase of the Pegasus system.
The U.S. presidential election is undoubtedly one of the most important events in the world of global politics. On the eve of the day when America will choose, after a presidential campaign that has went from a felony trial through an incumbent president being pushed off the ticket and multiple assassination attempts, the question now remains, what are we to expect from the election and how is it going to affect our region? Joining me now to discuss this is Jovanka Jakubek-Lalik, Associate Professor at the University of Warsaw. Good evening. It's great to have you with me in the studio back again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So let's take a look at the final day. There's been a lot happening so far. We have the last day. Both candidates are actually still trying to garner more votes. Kamala Harris, Pennsylvania, 19 electoral votes, a big prize. Donald Trump rallies in 3 states, 4 rallies in 3 states. Based on what we've seen so far, what can we expect from the last day, and are we to see any surprises?
The last day seems to be quite decisive, and the race indeed is very close. So both candidates are working very hard to gain support. And as we know, American elections are quite unpredictable because even if one candidate wins in popular vote, it might turn out differently in the electoral votes. So here again, the swing states are the most important places to rely, to campaign, and to ask for support. So we will see indeed what will happen.
As we've been looking at this campaign on both sides, we had the candidates trying to appeal to different groups, to ethnic minorities, to women based on reproductive rights, to American Poles, to Muslims as well as Jews when it comes to the conflict in the Middle East. Which of these groups do you think is going to be decisive when it comes to swing states and the final election result?
Indeed, this is inherent to the two-party system, which is very divisive, and people vote either for one party candidate or for the other. So it's very rarely that they decide to support the candidate from the opposition party, for the opposite party. The issues, the topics of these elections are very crucial. So, of course, Americans decide based on internal topics mainly. So economy, so migration, and also for women, I think it's super important, the position of both candidates towards reproductive rights.
Can we pinpoint any of those groups that could make a possible shift?
I think what could be quite surprising, and I expect that this could happen, is how normally Republican-leaning women will vote. They might vote surprisingly for Vice President Harris because of the issue of reproductive rights and also women's rights. So here we can maybe expect some surprise. However, all the other factors seem to be more or less aligned with the normal party choices. However, again, there might be some surprises when it comes to who is supporting Vice President Harris, when it comes to people who usually support Republicans. So here we can expect maybe one difference, and also the opposite way. So maybe some ethnic minorities that people would count that will support Vice President Harris, they might still vote for the former President Trump.
The last time you were here with me in the studio, we spoke about the Electoral College and the electoral vote, because this election, the U.S. election, is not only about the voting of the people, but it's also about the electoral vote. When do you think are we going to find out the actual election results when it comes to the U.S. presidential election?
Precisely. The American voting system is more complicated than European systems. So they have the 2 stages of voting. So first of all, they have popular vote, but people elect the electors. So those people who will then, in the second round, let's say, vote for the candidate for president. So here I still would say that we need to expect that the final results of the electoral vote will take some more time than only counting the ballots.
And based on empirical evidence we've seen so far, based on the candidates, what they've said, how they appealed also to Polish Americans, what do you think? Which of the candidates with their policies, focusing on the policies, is going to be better for Europe and our region?
Well, of course, here also opinions are divided. Should Vice President Harris win the elections, we can expect the continuity of American politics. However, also not 100%, because I believe that some changes will be quite apparent after Kamala Harris will take over from Joe Biden. Should Donald Trump win, on the other hand, we can expect unpredictability because this candidate is very difficult to be determined what his actions will be. However, for our region, what is the most important is the position of United States towards the war in Ukraine. And here,
which speaks for the security in our region, after all.
Of course. And here, those two candidates have very different positions. So Kamala Harris should probably continue the line of Joe Biden's policy towards Ukraine, so continue the support of the country against the Russian aggression, whereas President Trump's actions are quite unpredictable. On one hand, he claims that he can stop this war quite immediately, but on the other, he even holds some personal grudge against Ukraine because Ukraine was the reason for his first impeachment attempt. So here we can also expect very different twists and turns.
The next 24 hours, 48 hours are definitely going to be something to watch closely. Thank you so much. Jovanka Jakubek-Lalik, Associate Professor at the University of Warsaw. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
And so this would be all the latest news for now, so please stay tuned here on TVP World, as over the next 48 hours we will be bringing you more on the U.S. presidential election and more from the region.